Today in this session, we'll be talking about cloud security. Without making any further ado, let's move on to today's agenda to understand what all will be covered in today's session. So we'll start off this session by discussing the why and what of cloud security. After that, we'll be seeing how we can choose between a public, a private, and a hybrid cloud. After that, we'll see whether cloud security is really a concern among companies who are planning to make a move on the cloud. So once you have established that cloud security is really important, we'll see how secure should you make your application. After that, we'll be looking into the process of troubleshooting a threat in the cloud. After that, we'll be implementing that process in AWS. So guys, this is our agenda for today. Let's move on to the first topic of today's session, that why cloud security is important. So let's take an example here and talk of three very popular companies, LinkedIn, Sony, and iCloud. So LinkedIn in 2012 experienced a cyber attack wherein 6.5 million usernames and passwords were made public by the hackers. After that, Sony experienced the most aggressive cyber attack in history wherein their highly confidential files like their financials, their upcoming movie projects were made public by the hackers, right? And this made a huge impact on the business front of Sony. iCloud, which is a service from Apple, also experienced a cyber attack wherein personal or private photos of users were made public by the hackers, right? So guys, now in all these three companies, you can see there's a breach in security which needs to be addressed, right? So cloud security has to be addressed. It needs to be there in the cloud computing world. So since now we've established that cloud security is really important, let's move on to understand what cloud security actually is. So what is cloud security? So it is a use of latest technologies and techniques in programming to secure your application which is hosted on the cloud, or the data which is hosted on the cloud, and the infrastructure which is associated with the cloud computing. Right? And the other part of this is that whatever security techniques or whatever techniques or technology that you're using to secure your application should be updated as frequently as possible, because every day new threats are coming up, right? Every day there are new workarounds to problems, right? And you should be able to tackle these problems or these workarounds, and hence you should upgrade your security as frequently as possible, right? Moving ahead, let's understand how we can choose between a public, a private, and a hybrid cloud. So we've understood that what cloud security actually is. Now let's talk in terms of security and understand how we can choose between a public, a private, and a hybrid cloud. So if you were to choose between these three infrastructures, what should be our basis of judging which cloud we should choose, right? So you would opt for a private cloud when you have highly confidential files that you want to store on the cloud platform, right? Now there are two stories, or there are two ways of thinking a private infrastructure. You can either opt for private servers or private infrastructure on your own premises, or you can look up for servers, dedicated servers by your cloud provider, right? So that all comes under the private infrastructure. Then we have the public cloud infrastructure. In public cloud infrastructure, you would basically use websites that are public facing. So say if you have a products page where you have application which can be downloaded by the public, so that can be hosted on the public cloud, because there is nothing that has to be secret over there, right? So things like websites, things like data that is not confidential and you don't mind public seeing it, can be hosted on your public cloud. The third infrastructure is the most important infrastructure, which is the hybrid infrastructure, and this is the setup that most companies go for, right? So what if there's a use case wherein you have private files, highly confidential files, and a website as well, right? So if you have this kind of use case, you might go for a hybrid infrastructure, which is kind of best of both worlds. You get the security or the comfort of the private infrastructure and the cost effectiveness of the public cloud as well, right? So your hybrid cloud is basically, if you want your highly confidential be stored on your own premises and your website be hosted on your public cloud, this infrastructure would be hybrid cloud infrastructure. So basically you would choose a private cloud if you have highly confidential files, if you choose a public cloud if you have files that are not that important or files that you don't mind people seeing, and you would choose a hybrid cloud infrastructure if you want best of both worlds, right? So this addresses how we can choose between a public, private, and hybrid cloud. Moving on, let's understand whether cloud security is really a concern. So we have discussed that why cloud security is important. We've discussed what is cloud security, right? Now let's talk about whether this really makes sense, right? So if we say that cloud security is really important and there's no one who's actually thinking about it, there's no point, right? So let's see if companies who are making a move to the cloud actually think about cloud security. So here's a Gartner research on companies who are making a plan to move to the cloud or who has not moved to the cloud yet, right? So what are their concerns? Why are not they doing so? So the topmost reason listed by these companies was security and privacy concerns, right? So as you can see, these companies who want to make a move to the cloud are also worried about their security on the cloud infrastructure. And this makes it clear that cloud security is actually very important, right? Now we've understood that cloud security is really important. We have understood that companies are looking for cloud security, are actually following the practices for cloud security. But now, how secure should you make your application, right? What is the extent to which you should make your application secure? So let us start with this line. So it is said that cloud security is a mixture of art and science, right? Why? Let's see that. So it's a science because obviously you have to come up with new technologies and new techniques to protect your data, to protect your application, right? So it's a science because you have to be prepared with the technical part. But it is art as well. Why? Because you should create your techniques or you should create your technologies in such a way that your user experience is not hindered. Let me give you guys an example. Suppose you make an application, right? And for making it secure, you think, okay, after every 3 or 4 minutes, I'll ask the user for a password, right? From the security point of view, it seems okay, but from the user's point of view, it is actually hindering his user experience, right? So you should have that artist in you that you should understand when to stop or till where should you extend your security techniques. And also you should be creative as to what security techniques can be implemented so that the user experience is not hindered. For example, there is a two-step authentication you get that when you're logging into your Gmail account, right? So if you know your password, that is not enough. You should have an OTP as well to log into your Gmail account, right? So this might be hindering with user experience to some extent, but it is making your application secure as well, right? So you should have a balance between your science and the art part that you're applying on cloud security. Moving on, let's now discuss the process of troubleshooting a threat in the cloud. So let's take an example here. So like you're using Facebook, right? And you get a random message from some person saying there is some kind of story, like you usually get that while you're using Facebook, right? That such and such thing happened and click here to know more, right? You get that similar kind of message here. And by mistake, you actually click on that link. You didn't know that it's a spam and you click on that link. Now what happens is all the users that are there or all your friends on the Facebook chat gets that message, right? And they get furious as to why this kind of spam message is there in their inbox, right? And you get scared. Now you get angry as well and you have to bring your frustration out on Facebook. So you contact Facebook and you get to know that they already know the problem and they're already working on it and they're near to their solution. Now, how did they come to know that there is this kind of problem and needs to be solved, right? So basically cloud security is done in 3 stages. So the identification process or the threat identification process is done in 3 stages. The first stage is monitoring data. So you have AI algorithms which know what a normal system behavior is. And any deviation from this normal system behavior creates an alarm. And this alarm is then monitored by the cloud experts or the cloud security experts sitting over there. And if there's a threat, they see there's a threat, they go to the next step, which is gaining visibility, right? So you should understand what caused that problem, right? And or who caused that problem precisely. So your cloud security experts look for tools which give them the ability to look into the data and find or pinpoint that statement or pinpoint that event which caused this problem, right? So that is done using gaining visibility stage. And once we have established, okay, so this is the problem, then comes stage 3, which is managing access. So what this basically will do is it will give you a list of users. In case we are tracking the who, it'll give you a list of users who have access, and we will pinpoint the user who did that, right? And that user can be wiped out of the system using the managing access stage, right? So these are the stages which are involved in cloud security. Now, if we were to implement these stages in AWS, how would we do that? Let's see that. So the first stage was monitoring data, right? So if you have an application in AWS and you are experiencing this same kind of thing, what will you do for monitoring data? So you have a service in AWS called AWS CloudWatch. Now what is AWS CloudWatch? So basically it's a cloud monitoring tool. So you can monitor your EC2 and your other AWS resources on CloudWatch. How you can monitor them? You can monitor the network in, network out of your resource, and you can also monitor the traffic which is coming on to your instance, right? You can also create alarms on your CloudWatch. So if there's deviation from normal system behavior, like I said, so it'll create an alarm for you. It'll escalate the event and alert you about that thing so that you can go on and see what that problem actually is, right? So this is cloud, the monitoring tool, right? So this was about AWS CloudWatch. Let me give you a quick demo of how the AWS CloudWatch dashboard actually looks like. Okay guys, so this is your AWS dashboard. So now for accessing CloudWatch, you can go under the management tools. Here is CloudWatch. You'll click on CloudWatch. Now over here you can monitor anything, right? You'll go to metrics and you can see there are 3 metrics over here. You can monitor your EBS, you can monitor your EC2, you can monitor your S3, right? Now say suppose I want to monitor my EC2. So as you can see, so I have 2 instances running in my EC2. One is called for batch instance and the other is called WPS instance, right? Now these are all the metrics which are there. So I can check metrics for my WPS instance for network in. I can check the disk read ops. So let me select the network out metric and there'll be a graph over here. So I can see this graph, and as you can see, between 6 o'clock and 6:30 I experienced a surge in my traffic, right? So basically this is how you monitor your instance in CloudWatch, and you have all these default metrics to check how your instance is doing in your AWS. Right? So this is what CloudWatch is. You can also set alarms here, right? So if you go to alarms, click on create alarm, you'll go to EC2 and you can select your metric from over here. Now I've selected discrete bytes over here. Now once I do that, it'll ask me if there's a time range to which I want to monitor that instance, right? Okay, let's not set any time range. Let's click on next. So when you click next, you will be prompted with this page. So you can set your alarm name, you can set your alarm description here, and then you can specify that for what read write number you should get this alarm for, right? So you'll be setting that over here. After that, you'll go to actions. So once an alarm is triggered, where should that alarm go? Who should that alarm go to, right? So you can set it over here. Now, whenever the state is alarm, right, what should we do? So when the state is alarm, you can send your notification to your SNS topic. Now what is SNS? SNS, so basically it's a notification service. We'll be discussing what SNS is in the next session. Don't worry if you don't understand. So basically for now, what you can understand is that SNS is a protocol wherein you set, if you get a notification, what to do with that notification or whom to send to that notification, right? So if there's a topic called notify me in SNS. So in notify me, I have configured an email address that is my email address, that whenever a notification comes to the SNS service or the notify me topic to be precise, it sends an email to me, right, with that message. So I'll get a message with this alarm that such and such thing that has happened in CloudWatch. Now you do whatever is required. The other thing that you can do over here is in the same SNS topic, you can also configure a Lambda function to be executed, right? Now what that Lambda function will do, so say suppose I configure the metric to be of CPU usage, right? And I say whenever the 40% metric is crossed, create an alarm or like go to an alarm state, and it notifies the SNS notify me topic about this. In the notify me topic, I can configure a Lambda function to clear all the background processes in that E0 instance, right? So if I do that, the CPU usage will automatically come down, right? So this becomes a use case that you want to launch a Lambda function whenever your CPU usage goes beyond 40%, right? And hence, this is the way you would do it. So this was about CloudWatch. There's nothing much to it. You create alarms and you monitor metrics, right? Moving ahead, let's move on to the second process, which is gaining visibility. So for gaining visibility, basically you have to track your whatever activity is happening in your AWS account. So there's a service in AWS called CloudTrail, right? So the CloudTrail service is basically a logging service wherein each and every log to each and every API call is made. Now, how is it useful? Let's talk about the security perspective, right? So your hacker got access to your system. So you should know how he got access to your system. So if you have a time frame, say he got access to your system or you started to face the problem, say around 4 o'clock, right? So you can set the time between 2 o'clock and whatever the time is right now and monitor what all has been going around. And hence you can identify the place where that hacker got access to your system, right? Now this is the part where you'll get to know who that person actually is, or you can isolate the problem or which caused that. So if you take a cue from our Facebook example, over here you can actually pinpoint who is responsible for those spam messages, because you'll all have those logs, right? You'll see the origin of those messages. Now, once you've done that, the next step is managing this guy out of the system or wiping this guy out of the system. But before that, let me show you guys how CloudTrail actually looks like. So let's go back to our AWS dashboard and go to our CloudTrail service. So again, under the management tools, you have the CloudTrail service. You'll click on the CloudTrail service and you will reach this dashboard. All right, so here you have the logs. So as you can see, you can set the time range here, but I'm not doing that. I'm just showing you the logs. So even for logging into my console, it is showing me that I've logged into my console at this time, on this date, right? So every event is logged, guys. Every event that is happening on your AWS console is being logged. So let's talk about the S3 bucket. So somebody deleted a bucket and that has again been logged, right? So it happened at 7:38 p.m. on 28th of March 2017, right? So any activity, any kind of activity which happens in AWS will be logged over here. Okay guys, so this was about CloudTrail. So let's go back to our slide and move ahead in today's session. So like I said, so now you've identified who is responsible for your problem, right? So now the next step is managing access, right? So now you should be able to throw that person or remove that person from the system. So most of the times what happens is, like if you take our Facebook use case, so basically there was a user who triggered that problem, right? So the two things that you have to do is, first of all, you have to remove that spam from your system. So you've got to know where it originated, so now you start wiping it. After that, you have to debar that user from doing it again, right? So from the source, you'll get to know who that user is. Now, using managing access, you will actually get access to do all that, right? So if you talk about AWS, this service is called AWS IAM. So what AWS IAM does is, it basically authenticates that particular service. Now you are a root user, right? So you can do anything. But what if you have employees, and obviously all employees will not have all the rights, right? Now what if you want to give granular permissions to your employees? Now for like in our example, what if one specific employee is capable to track down this problem, right? Or track down what has to be done. So you can give that particular person the rights. How? Using IAM, right? So IAM is used to provide granular permissions. It actually secures your access to the EC2 instances by giving you a private file, and also it is free to use, right? So let's see how IAM is used. So let me go back to my AWS console. Okay guys, so this is my AWS dashboard. I'll go to the security, identity and compliance domain and I'll click on IAM, right? Now over here, I'll click on roles. Now I can see all the roles which are there in my IAM, right? So since I would have identified which role is creating a problem, so I'll go to that role. So for example, I have a problem in say AWS Elastic Beanstalk EC2 role, right? I'll click on this. Now once I click, I will be getting this screen. So now I can see the permissions, the trust relationships, the access advice, and the revoke sessions, right? So I'll go to revoke sessions and I'll click on revoke active sessions, and hence I'll be able to wipe out that user from accessing my AWS resources, right? So this is how you use IAM, guys. Now one more thing that you can do over here is you'll go back to your dashboards, go to roles. Now like I told you guys, you can actually create a role for a person who will be able to access restricted things on your AWS account, right? So let me quickly show you how you can do that. So you'll click on create new role and you'll give your role some name. So let's give it hello over here, right? Click on next step, go to role for identity provider access, right? And now you can select how that user of yours will be accessing your AWS account, right? So allow users from Amazon Cognito, Amazon, Facebook, Google ID. All right, so let's select this. Now let us select Facebook and let's give it some random application ID, right? So anyways, not going to create this role. I'm just telling you guys how to do it, right? So basically you get your application ID by Facebook. Over there you'll be, since you are using Facebook to authenticate that guy to your AWS account, you'll get an application ID by going on to graph.facebook.com. You can do all of that over there. Okay, so that is not the concern. You'll enter the application ID and click on next step, right? So you'll get that policy document. So whatever you configured in your text boxes has actually been created in a JSON file, right? So you don't have to edit anything over here. Click on next step. Now you have to attach a policy. Now what is the policy? So policy is basically what all permissions you want to grant that user, right? So if you want to grant him the execution role for Lambda, you can do that. You can grant him the S3 execution role, right? So whatever policy that you create, you can actually create a policy in your IAM, right? I'm not going much in details of this because all of this is covered in your IAM session, but I'm showing you guys because as I just told you guys how this can be done. So let me show you how it can be done, right? So you'll select whatever policy you want and click on next step and review it and create that rule. This is it, guys, right? So you can actually select a policy, whatever policy you want that role to have, and hence, so policy is basically a permission that you want that role to have. So if he gets a permission to just review your instances, he'll be only able to review your instances. Okay, one more thing I want to make clear is that you don't have to give your security credentials to that guy anymore, because now you'll be specifying that user will be able to connect to Facebook. Okay, so also you have a part here wherein you can specify what specific user can access it, right? So I can type in my name here, and if I'm being logged in through Facebook, if my username is Hemant Sharma, only then I'll be able to connect to my AWS account, right? Now this is ID, right? I can also set the locale parameter, right? So ID I think is fine, wherein you will be adding the ID of the guy whom you want this AWS account be accessed by, right? So you all have Facebook IDs, right? So you all have to just punch in your Facebook IDs over here, click on next step, and then you'll be able to access this AWS account if I create this role right now with the policies that I'll be attaching to your role, right? So this is how you use IAM, guys. Let us go back to our session. Okay, so these are the three services, guys. So you have IAM, you have CloudTrail, and you have CloudWatch, using which you can control or you can actually see what is going on in your AWS account.